They say guns are dangerous, but what's more alarming is the quiet campaign to restrict and ban whatever keeps us secure. We've seen a steady push to demonize and remove certain ammo from civilian hands, so-called cop killer bullets, rounds labeled military only, etc. But did you know there's a lot more? In this video, we'll talk about which ammo types are on the chopping block, why these bans exist in the first place, and how the laws that ban them actually undermine our right to self-defense. Let's begin with something that never fails to get people riled up: Black Talon ammunition. Back in the 1990s, Winchester released these hollow point rounds that had a specific design intended to expand and create large wound channels, which is typical of many hollow point bullets. However, a media frenzy kicked off when high-profile shootings involving this brand came under intense scrutiny. The round was labeled a cop killer and demonized as though it could penetrate body armor effortlessly. In reality, the design was never more armor-piercing than other high-velocity ammo, and hollow points in general are not defined by any official standard as cop killers. Instead, they're commonly recognized for their potential effectiveness in self-defense because they reduce overpenetration. The panic reached such a fever pitch that Winchester decided to discontinue Black Talon in name, though they later produced similar designs under different labels. The hype surrounding these rounds highlighted how easily the media can shift public perception simply by focusing on scary-sounding features like razor-sharp petals. Lawmakers seized that outrage, fueling calls to remove these bullets from circulation. Although they weren't officially banned by federal law, the pressure was enough to move them off the shelves, proving how quickly emotional responses can override reason when it comes to ammunition restrictions. Another high-profile target is the legendary 50 BMG. This massive cartridge is renowned for its long-range capability and power. A 50 BMG rifle can strike targets well beyond a mile away, which is why anti-gun groups frame it as a weapon of war that no ordinary person should own. In states like California, the 50 BMG has been effectively banned by classifying rifles chambered for it as unlawful to purchase or sell. The irony is that there is virtually no record of these rifles being used in common street crimes. They're large, expensive, and impractical for anything but specialized long-distance shooting. It's almost comical to imagine a criminal attempting to lug around a 30-pound rifle just to rob a convenience store. The narrative that these big rounds are too destructive for normal citizens often ignores the fundamental reality that responsible owners who invest in 50 BMG rifles are typically precision shooters, enthusiasts, or collectors. Nonetheless, the intimidation factor of such a huge cartridge has been enough for lawmakers to restrict it, even though the majority of crimes are committed with handguns in more common calibers. A more compact round that has also faced attempts at bans is the 5.7x28. This cartridge gained notoriety in the civilian sphere alongside the 5.7 pistol. One tragic event that thrust it into the spotlight was the Fort Hood shooting, where the perpetrator used this platform. That alone spurred a wave of calls to prohibit this round because it was dubbed armor-piercing, even though the civilian available loads lacked the steel penetrator cores that could truly defeat most body armor. Political rhetoric drove the narrative that this was some special super bullet that regular citizens had no business touching. In reality, the 5.7x28 offers a flatter trajectory and lower recoil than many common handgun rounds, making it easier to shoot accurately. From a practical standpoint, it's not innately more dangerous than other calibers in lawful civilian use, yet it's constantly singled out because the media pinned it with an intimidating label. This pattern of demonizing certain ammo due to sensational headlines remains a top strategy for those seeking incremental disarmament. Another example is the infamous myth surrounding Teflon-coated bullets. Many people have heard the phrase "cop killer bullets," and it's often linked to the rumor that Teflon coatings enable rounds to slice through Kevlar vests. In truth, the Teflon's purpose was to reduce barrel wear and help the bullet feed properly, not to enhance penetration through armor. The ability of a projectile to pierce ballistic vests is more about velocity and core material than any sort of coating. Unfortunately, the Teflon bullet myth persists, and it has led to legislative efforts aimed at banning so-called armor-piercing bullets that, under realistic testing, behave no differently than plenty of legal rounds. It's a perfect storm of scary-sounding terms combined with a lack of technical understanding by lawmakers and the public. We also see restrictions in some states on incendiary and tracer rounds. These are often classified as gimmicks by certain folks, but the truth is they have specialized applications. Tracer rounds can help a shooter see their bullet path at night, which is valuable for training or in certain defensive scenarios. Incendiary bullets can ignite flammable targets, which might be relevant in very narrow circumstances, but those aren't typically encountered in everyday civilian life. Many jurisdictions ban them anyway, lumping them into a broad category of too dangerous ammunition, as if restricting them is a magic fix for crime. It's another example of how fear of special effects or unique features can get ammunition labeled as something only the military should handle. This is a case where regulation ignores practicality in favor of theatrical alarm, leaving law-abiding gun owners with fewer options. Now, looking beyond the United States, we find even more peculiar bans. The UK's restrictions on hollow points are a prime example. Hollow points are recognized by many enthusiasts for home defense because they generally expand on impact and reduce the chance of over-penetration, which can protect bystanders or neighbors in densely populated areas. Yet in the UK, the rules forbid civilians from possessing expanding ammo. Meanwhile, British law enforcement can use them. That contradiction leads us to wonder about the real motive behind these bans. If the objective is to reduce harm to bystanders, hollow points can actually help achieve that goal. But when emotion and moral posturing take center stage, logic often takes a back seat, and the idea of a bullet expanding inside a target conjures images of unnecessary brutality for those unfamiliar with the ballistic advantages. Turning to the context of international regulations on warfare, there's a long-standing principle in the Geneva Conventions that prohibits the use of expanding bullets in combat. This might sound strange to some of us, given that civilians are allowed to use hollow points for self-defense in many parts of the world, with exceptions like the UK just mentioned. The military is restricted to full metal jacket rounds, in part due to outdated notions that they're less cruel or that they reduce the severity of battlefield injuries. There's a degree of confusion here, as some interpret these rules as intended to minimize needless suffering, while others point out that such restrictions can be arbitrary given the lethal nature of warfare. Regardless, it illustrates that ammo bans or limitations often come from perceptions formed decades ago, and they don't always align with modern ballistic science or pragmatic approaches to self-defense. In Australia, a stringent set of guidelines governs firearms and ammunition. Though regulations vary by state, there's a general trend of tight controls on what calibers one can own and the specific conditions under which they can be used. There are restrictions on certain ammo based on velocity and potential for high energy, along with a tough licensing system that can demand exhaustive documentation for each rifle or caliber. Australian authorities maintain that these curbs reduce violence, but it is worth noting that criminals, by definition, don't follow the regulations. The average law-abiding gun owner, however, faces significant hurdles simply to practice or hunt. This approach shows how governments often believe that controlling ammo is a straightforward path to controlling gun usage, ignoring the fact that those who break the law are not particularly concerned with bureaucratic processes. Oh, and if you haven't heard of it, there's this increasingly aggressive trend to control or prohibit lead ammo in the name of environmental protection. California led the charge by banning lead bullets for hunting throughout the state, claiming it's necessary to save condors and other wildlife from lead poisoning. While nobody wants to poison birds, many of us see this as more than an environmental move. It forces hunters and shooters to purchase more expensive copper or alternative metal rounds, which can increase the cost of a ranged session or a hunt substantially. Critics of this approach argue that it's a backdoor tactic to drive up ammo prices and thus discourage the shooting sports, making it a form of gun control veiled in green language. Some even point out that these bans disproportionately affect those with lower incomes who may not have the resources to buy premium non-lead cartridges. There's also speculation that lead ammo restrictions could expand nationally if federal agencies like the EPA step in. We've witnessed attempts in the past to regulate aspects of the shooting sports through environmental mandates. If successful, these efforts could lead to broad prohibitions on lead usage in indoor ranges or even in personal defense ammo. We must keep a close watch on these developments, because once precedent is established, lawmakers can apply the same logic anywhere they see fit. Whether or not one is concerned about wildlife, it's vital to realize that many of these proposals come with minimal scientific backing regarding actual risks posed by spent lead rounds in remote regions, especially compared to other more impactful environmental factors. Moreover, the notion that lead-free automatically means safer for everyone can be misleading. Certain solid copper rounds can penetrate deeper than expected and might carry more retained mass upon hitting a target. This means they can pass through walls or other barriers more readily, which could potentially place bystanders at greater risk if a shot misses the intended mark. Traditional lead hollow points, when engineered well, tend to deform and transfer energy, reducing overpenetration. So, banning lead-based bullets doesn't necessarily result in a net gain for public safety. It can also curb the variety of ammunition available, limiting consumer choice and inflating prices. Taken collectively, these factors underline how seemingly minor environmental considerations become a launching pad for broader restrictions. It's important to examine the bigger political picture behind these bans. Let's be blunt. It's often more about winning votes or appeasing certain groups than keeping the public safe. Politicians grandstand with phrases like "ban armor-piercing bullets" or "stop these extreme killing rounds" because it plays well with a crowd that may not know much about ballistics. It's a quick soundbite that conveys an appearance of standing up against something deadly. Unfortunately, it also misrepresents the real capabilities of ammunition, lumping routine defensive or sporting rounds into a sensational narrative about unstoppable bullets. Public perception is swayed by these dramatic calls, leading to legislation that rarely aligns with practical realities. The media contributes to the confusion by sensationalizing any new or unusual ammo, labeling it a potential doomsday device. Anytime a criminal uses a round that the press can spin as exotic or particularly destructive, the headlines are enough to spur new attempts at bans. Rarely is there a deep dive into how that ammo actually functions. An irresponsible or evil individual can do harm with just about any cartridge. But by honing in on a certain name or brand, journalists and politicians create the illusion that we've uncovered the greatest threat to public safety. A ban is pushed through, the public breathes a sigh of relief, and the real criminals continue to acquire whatever they want through illegal methods. The end result is that bans on ammunition mainly affect people who already follow the law. We're forced to adapt, pay more, or give up certain ammo types altogether. Meanwhile, criminals, who don't bother with legal purchase channels, aren't impacted. They obtain ammunition through black markets, theft, or by other illegal means. So the cycle continues, with each new ban shining a spotlight on the law-abiding while doing little to actually curb violent crime. Once we recognize that ammo bans are largely based on optics, fear, and political gains, it becomes clear that our right to self-defense is slowly eroded without most people noticing. That's how incremental disarmament works. It doesn't always attack the firearm head-on, but it can weaken the supply of ammunition. If you can't load your legally owned gun, its deterrent value is diminished. It might be a stealthier approach than outright confiscation, yet the result is similar: a reduction in the practical exercise of our constitutional right. Here's the reality. Criminals don't file forms or wait for permits. They don't ask the government's permission. Yet the bulk of these legislative measures add more paperwork and more risk for the person who just wants to defend their home or enjoy a day at the range. Although the arguments for many ammo bans might sound compassionate or sensible on the surface, they mostly penalize the lawful gun community. This causes frustration, and rightly so, because every time there's a push for new legislation, it's the good guys who jump through hoops, while the real bad actors carry on without a second thought. I don't know about you, but I see this pattern as a major threat to our ability to keep and bear arms. Some of these banned rounds are not even the top choice for criminals, yet they get singled out because they look scary, or because of a tragic incident where an evil individual happened to use them. But what do you think? Comment below, and please like, share, subscribe, and click on the bell icon for more of these videos. Thanks for watching.